All right, everybody. So thank you for coming. My name is Susan Hartung. Please ignore this little pop-up down here. I can't figure out how to make Norton go away. I think they just want me to buy their product, which they may end up winning eventually. But my name's Susan Hartung, and I am the parent of Warren Hartung, who is a 35-year-old with Cat 6A. For a long time, he was the oldest person with Cat 6A, but I know that has changed a lot since then. So about a year ago, when I was getting ready to give this, I called it When the School Bus Stops Coming, but that was before but I will just go ahead and jump into this, and I will get through the slides pretty quickly, and then I'm here for any questions that you may want to ask. Just to give you some background, this is Warren. He was born on May 27th, 1985. He is still, I think, one of the oldest with Cat 6A. His APGARs were 6 and 9. He had stiff limbs, sensitive to touch, a strong light reflex, and a strong gag reflex. And I'm sure that sounds familiar to many of you. But after 4 days, because back in those days you got to stay in the hospital for 3 nights, he was released from the hospital as essentially a healthy infant. All right, he crawled at a year, he walked at 22 months, he never babbled, he never talked, and he still has difficulty with texture food. But he was always a happy baby, and I must tell you, I brought my friend, my geneticist, with me to the last conference, and the one thing we both noticed was how happy all the children were, and that was certainly a characteristic of Warren, but we didn't realize it was a characteristic of Warren and Cat 6A. We just thought that was his personality, but it became apparent for reasons I will explain in a minute. All right, so it was 35 years ago. We had no one diagnosis. We had, of course, PDD, pervasive developmental delay. His motor skills were terrible, so there was cerebral palsy, the eye thing with the strabismus. He had something that was called aerophagia, which was air swallowing. It was so severe, he ended up in the hospital a few times with a distended stomach. Looking back now, I think I realized this probably had to do with gastrointestinal upset. But it was just a puzzle to everybody then, and there really was no treatment for it. He developed epilepsy around 9, and at age 3 was diagnosed with autism. So these multiple diagnoses actually, so go ahead.
Just said, how similar.
Yeah, doesn't it sound similar? Yeah, the Woodbury. I know you really understand.
Yeah,
Actually, but all these diagnoses turned out to be very beneficial because it put us in touch with many great doctors. We were fortunate to be near Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C., but it also helped us get a number of support services as time went on, because like it was the more I could say that was wrong with him, the more they were willing to offer us. All right, so now the reason I said it was interesting about Warren's happy disposition is a little over, close to 4 years later, his sister was born. She was and is the antithesis of her brother. She talked at 9 months, was walking at 10 months. She's still somewhat, limited verbal, not real conversational. She's very independent. But we were sure that at some point through genetic testing, we would find out they would have some variant of the same gene or chromosome abnormality. Now, here's my little sidebar story. We always wanted to have him tested, but nobody was doing genetic testing then. Then Autism Speaks, who I gave a sizable donation to every year via my credit card, was doing a study at NIH, and they were all set to do the testing. And then they told me since I did not have guardianship and they could not make informed consent, they would not do the testing. By that time, I had a very good friend who worked for GeneDx, and she did do the testing for us. And it was kind of a shocking day when she came to my house and said, I know what the issue with Warren is, but I have no idea what Emily's problem is. But that's her sister, Emily, who is now 30. All right, so getting on to adult services, I'm sorry I did that. Through age 21, as probably most of you know, special education services are entitlement. You are entitled to those. Federal law has said so. They cannot deny you that. Some services are good, some have been bad. That has been our experience. But remember this, an IEP is a contract between you and the school. And when that contract is not enforced, the student needs to be compensated. They are required to give you the best education in the least restricted environment closest to home. But a program is only as good as a teacher, and teachers change. Trust your instincts on this. I visited so many programs, and I wanted to see other children like Warren. And I wanted to see if they were happy and if they were learning, and are they learning the skills they needed. I started keeping my notebook, which I have to this day, except now it fills 2 file drawers. We changed programs more than once because we knew what he was getting was not what he needed. And having written a very detailed IEP, the school system had to go along. All right, so IDEA says that educational service must be provided to students with disability who are in school until the age of 21. States have some flexibility in that. They must offer services until 21, whether that's in the school setting or not varies, and some will extend it past 21. They have to offer transition services. Federal law says they must start at 16. In Maryland, where I live, they start at 14. But I will say this, transition services at 14 are meaning that there's someone in the school called a transition support teacher who probably meets with your child once a year, talks to them or talks to their teachers, what do they like, what are they good at, probably talks to you, they participate in the IEP, but it's not until the last 2 years of school that they really begin to serve a bigger role. All right, so at age 18, what you need to do is you need to make sure your child has a photo ID because you are going to need this for almost everything. Your Department of Motor Vehicles usually provide a non-driver's license form of ID. One of the hardest things for me to believe was that if they are a male and they are 18, you must register them for Selective Service. Yes, you really have to do that. There's just no exception. Fortunately, we don't have a draft right now, so it's kind of a non-issue. And you need to check with your private health insurance company. We found out almost too late that as long as I was employed with my insurance company, which was it's a very good insurance company, that if I could prove the severity of their disability, and I notified them in their case by 19, that as long as I was on the policy, they could stay on the policy. And as I'm sure all of you know, that is costing that insurance company so much money, and we are so grateful for it. You're probably eligible for Medicaid and Medicare after 18 if you don't have that insurance. But often you can just get a piggyback policy, and I think having the primary insurance, and nobody told us that. You know, I just was like something was coming up medically, and I just wanted to, didn't know what to do. And actually my son was already past 19. But as I will comment in a few minutes, if you have been around a while and you've made some connections, sometimes you can muscle people into bending a few rules, and we were able to get them in. We had to prove that disability was lifelong. There was no hope of getting out of this disability being cured. At 18, you can also apply for supplemental Social Security income. You can apply before then, but then the parent's income is considered. At 18, it is based just on the assets of the individual, but they can't have more than $2,000 in assets. Now, we have a catch-22 in Maryland in that if you want to have a handicapped driver's tag, then the person must be on the title of the car, but that automatically puts them over $2,000 in assets.
Oh.
So that was a dilemma for us that I don't think has really been resolved for a long time. I think it's still an issue that's floating out there. It's one of those catch-22s. To apply for SSI, the student or someone on his or her behalf will need to provide proof of the student's income and expenses, such as costs for housing, food, clothing. Start saving some of those receipts the year before. And when Social Security asks you if you charge them rent, the answer is always yes, right? Because you need to start charging them rent when they're 18.
Yes, but you can't charge them more than what Social Security thinks is reasonable.
What reasonable amount? Right, you're right. Absolutely, it's a reasonable amount.
And something here
Sure.
is that what we did was we took our expenses and divided by the number of people in the house, and that was her fair share, is what they call it.
Right.
They wouldn't let me do that.
There's lots of ins and outs with this. You know, we looked at what the going rate for renting a room was, and that was what we charged. I know it caught me off guard the first time they asked.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that was helpful, that would have been helpful for me to know beforehand. And I'm going to knock on wood here. Social Security has never asked me for receipts. They check in once a year. What are they spending? What are they doing? But about once a month, I grab a bunch of receipts and I keep them, and I charge everything that applies to Emily and Warren so that I can easily go back and document what our expenses are with them. All right, so at 21, though, you are eligible for services, but entitlement ends. You have to apply for services and you have to prove need. And you need to almost everybody's going to require you to have a current psychoeducational evaluation. And current means less than 3 years, and some places want it less than that. Now, when Emily and Warren came out, now I was working for the school system. That had part of it to do with it, but they were pretty lenient about trying to give you a really current psycho ed right before you graduated. But the current feeling is that I think the law is that if the services don't change and the disability hasn't changed and they are meeting the needs, that they don't have to do it more than every 3 years. And really, if nothing's changed, they don't have to do anything more than a quick little update than that. So I think that's something you have to be a little persuasive about to get them to do it. If they know they're going into SSI or some kind of more restrictive program than just living independently, they're more willing. But that's something you need to be aware of, because sometimes, and I've known this to happen to people, if you don't bring it up, they just don't do it, and all of a sudden you're out of luck. And that kind of evaluation can run easily in excess of $4,000. All right, adult services, and I'll speak for my area in Maryland primarily. Different options are continued education opportunities, mostly at community colleges. Our community college here is one of the largest in the United States, Montgomery College. They offer self-contained programs for individuals with disabilities. They also have a very strong program to provide supports for inclusion. We have a number of adult day programs. We have supported employment and residential settings, and these are usually combined with other adult day programs. These vary so much community to community that I can't even begin to tell you what's available, where you are, how it's structured. What I can tell you is that while your child may be very skilled and independent, from what I've seen from the presenters, IDD, intellectual developmental disability, seems to be one of the characteristics of most CAT 6A individuals. And most individuals do not want to live with their parents forever, and most parents don't want their children living with them forever. So it's important early on to start thinking about how to address this issue. I teach high school, I teach inclusion classes, and I teach honors level classes. And I tell every parent that I talk to, is if you don't have a plan for when your child graduates, they're graduating from their school to your couch. Each has a Medicaid home and community-based waiver. That's authorized under the Social Security Act. But this varies a great deal from state to state. I'll show you a link in a minute where you can find out what your state's is. Maryland also has a Medicaid autism waiver, and I think there's 2 other states, and I don't know what they are, that also have that. That goes from birth to age 21, and at 21 you are eligible to roll over into DDA, but it offers a lot of supports through the school years. And most communities have local programs, recreation, respite, etc. And here it is. It's MedicaidWaiver.org. It's a state-by-state listing of exactly what services are available at your state. And here's the big thing I will tell you. Get on every waiting list you can get on now. In Maryland, and we are a pretty savvy community, our income levels are decent, we have strong things, but we have 11,000 people on our waiting list for services from DDA. And priority is given to those in crisis, either by their disability or their parents' disability. The top category is crisis resolution. And by definition, and again, this is true, when I started doing this about getting involved in this aspect of advocacy 6 years ago, they said crisis resolution meant that if they did not step in and help, within 3 months there would be disaster. They've now amended that to 6 months. Nothing's changed, but they've just lengthened the timeline. The next category is crisis prevention, which they've now extended to a year, and it used to be 6 months. Our autism waiver program has a 7-year waiting list. Most pediatricians are telling parents if they suspect the child has autism, get on the waiting list, because there really is no criteria in Maryland to get on it, but it's a 7-year waiting list. Again, they can't have over $2,000 in assets, but you can't save money via an able account for them. And you should look at food stamps, housing vouchers, things like this. This is the other thing that I tell parents, and I never, and DDA, which in Maryland is Developmental Disability Administration, gets very upset with me when I say this. But when we like to think of our children in terms of their strength, everything they can do, but when you're qualifying for them service, you need to think about the worst day you have had with your child and write it down. Document everything. Hospitalizations, 911, poison control calls, police reports, every relevant evaluation, especially psychological ones. And don't forget your medical history, your surgeries, anything that might interfere with your ability to care for your child at some point. And honestly, that can happen anytime. I think this is more true even than when I was doing this 15 years ago, and even 5 years ago when we went to residential services, because funding is so tight. And COVID has just stretched this community's budgets beyond belief. The agency that serves our kids has spent over $250,000 in PPE equipment alone since COVID started. It's really tough, so you really have to make a very strong case. In Maryland, services for adults are funded in 2 ways, via providers or self-directed services. If you choose provider-based services, my recommendation is to align yourself early. Emily and Warren started attending CSS, Community Sports Services, where they're serviced by, when they were 5 and 8, and they would go like 2 afternoons a week. Our governor had just unlocked the waiting list for services, and I think I got $5,000 a year total, and I was in heaven. But they could go 2 afternoons a week. Then over time that increased, we sent them to a summer program. Then as they became more adults, they went for respite weekends and summer camps. Finally, when they graduated, they went to an adult day program. And then 5 years ago, they transitioned into adult services. I don't know if other states have this, but we have something relatively new in Maryland called self-directed services. It's so that you get like a backpack of funding, and you can purchase services. You can hire people to take your child to a job and be a job coach. You can pay for a class at a community college. Some parents are using that money to help subsidize an apartment with a live-in staff person, or day programs or transportation. And I think they're doing this for two reasons. One, these providers are so strapped financially right now that they're taking in very few new clients each year. So the demand is far exceeding the availability. So, and of course, when you graduate, at least in Maryland, I think it's true most places, you have that transition year. That first year from 21 to 22, there are a lot of programs in place to make access to adult services more available, and services to help guide you through the system. After that, it's far more complicated. So a lot of people who cannot get picked up by a provider will go for self-directed services and at least get into the system. Having said that, a lot of families just choose self-directed services. They feel it gives their child more autonomy and more independence, and they've been really happy with it. We have a really strong network in Maryland. It's called SDAN. It's a special self-directed advocacy network. So those are the kind of two things we have going on in Maryland. Adult day programs are driven by service plans, which is like an IEP. It's the level of need and support is established, and client interest and skills drive the program. It can include recreation, classes, part-time or full-time paid or volunteer work. And generally they are community-based, except when there's a pandemic. And then that all stops. All right, 5 years ago, Emily and Warren went into residential services. So Warren was 30 and Emily was about 25. I will tell you, it was Emily's behaviors that prompted that move. Warren was still a happy, pleasant guy. Emily has the autism and a bipolar component, and she was being very aggressive at that time and very hard to control. And our provider, who I love, just said, I think she'll do better in residential placement where everything is predictable. And I will tell you, she thrived. She thrived. And Warren was okay with it. And I will tell you, he's served by people who truly love him. And my bottom line was, I'm not putting one into residential and keeping one child at home. That's just too much to ask. It was easier to do it all together at one time. So we are very fortunate. They live in side-by-side townhouses. Each has a roommate, round-the-clock staff support, and they're 10 minutes from our house. When there's not an epidemic, Warren goes out every day. He delivers Meals on Wheels. He collects recycling at the facility. He takes a drumming lesson. I'll show you that in a minute. And he goes to movies, out to eat. Understand, he gets lots of support for this. I'm sorry, but he has a very full life. Warren loves music and movies more than anything. I'm sure many of you can relate to that. And he will approach pretty girls in stores, listening to his music, grab their hands and start dancing. He's a happy guy for the most part. And his school experience, his vocational skills were all designed around getting him to that point. So what I'd like to say to you today is it's never too early to start thinking about a vision for what you want your child's life to be as an adult. Find mentors and people who have walked similar paths and let them guide you. Warren was about 3 when I ran into people I'm still in contact with who really changed our lives. Learn how to advocate. I have a chat here. Thank you, Trish. Because you are your child's voice. Certainly they need to be part of it, but you need to be their advocate. So another sidebar here. We have for years had an evaluation system in Maryland called the Matrix. And Emily and Warren always came out at the highest score, getting the most level. Well, so as this year they've decided to change it. They're going with something called the CIST. Maybe some of you have had that, I don't know. And they've contracted out to another agency. And they called me a while back to set up Warren's evaluation. Now, usually that's done together with the provider and his caregivers and us and him. And we sit around a table and we all look at the evaluation together. But because of COVID, they do it virtually. But they said because of the providers, no, I'm sorry, because of, I think it's transgender somebody, whoever's designed the evaluation tool does not want to share that. So I couldn't get a copy. So I asked if we could use document camera, and they wouldn't let that go either. So they were also, and I said they were really getting pushy, but I said, well, let me ask DDA, because I'm chair of their Quality Assurance Council. So I asked Mr. Simons, who is the deputy director for DDA, if we can't get around it. Well, the next phone call I got was that Warren's case has been put on hold until we can meet again in person. So some of what I'm about to tell you really is true, and it really works. Volunteer with your local agencies. Learn about their services, what their needs are, and how you can make services better by helping them even where your family member needs them. I am very involved with CSS. I do a community bowling fundraiser for the clients and their families and friends every year. We have a ball. We raise about 15 to 20,000. And of course, that's off the table now. So we just started some trivia nights, and we're doing a trivia night once a month where families and staff and clients can get on board. You know, I'm certainly by no means making CSS more solvent, but I'm making myself more valuable to them, and it does pay off. Find your parent group networks. I know you all are very involved with Cat 6A, but find other parents in your community, what they're doing, and listen. But remember, everyone has a different need and opinion. So see for yourself. I've been to all these parent groups, and some people in there I just do not agree with, and I just try to be quiet, and which is hard for me, really is, and go my own way. And one last thing I'll mention is guardianship versus surrogate decision makers. We did not seek guardianship until Emily and Warren went into residential. And the main issue is because both of them have had significant medical issues. And when they go to the ER, they have to make their own decision for themselves. And if they can't, which obviously my kids really can't make an informed decision, then a surrogate decision maker is appointed. And I know that has been friends. Sometimes it's done on the phone. Sometimes it's even a nurse. And we did not want to have that happen. So we opted for guardianship. And the one thing you need to know about that is you will need to hire a lawyer for you, and you will also need to hire a lawyer to represent your child. So it's not an inexpensive proposition. But the one thing you also can do that my lawyer informs me is if in your will, if you state who you want to continue that guardianship when you no longer are around, if that person, a sibling, an aunt, an uncle, even if it's an attorney, agrees to that, it can be very routinely handed over to them without a great deal of expense. So get your name out there. It makes a difference. I started in 1988 with our county special needs preschool council, and then we started an organization called Pisces. And what I'm probably most proud of is a gentleman named Elliot Portnoy and came to me one day, and it's a long story. We formed something called Kids Enjoy Exercise Now. We had 15 clients, 40 volunteers. It provides free exercise with volunteer mentors to people with significant disabilities. We're now in 8 cities in the United States. It's pretty big. And I was one of the founding members. I was on a number of boards. I started the DD Advisory Council for our county as a spinoff from our Commission on People with Disabilities. I am still a member of our DDA Quality Assurance Council and past chair for that. As I told you my story, sometimes when I need to, dropping one of those titles opens doors. And finally, the last thing I'll say to you is remember, this did not happen just to your child. It happened to you also. So you've got to make time for yourself. And it happened to your other children. They will always love their brothers and sisters and always will. But there are times they will resent them. And they will worry about who will take care of them when you no longer can. They will need professional support too. There's SIP shops, there's all kinds of things for siblings. I think that's the next big thing coming our way. One day I wanted to file all the kids in the car and go get ice cream, and Warren's brother turned to me and said he would not anymore listen to a We Sing DVD in the car. And that was a big wake-up call to us. The following year I started getting respite services, and we took our 2 non-disabled boys to Disney World. And once a year we took them on a vacation just by themselves. All right, so find out about respite services. Your Cat 6A children need time alone with you, but your neurotypical children need time alone with you, and you need time alone without any of them. And that's it for me.